Today, we're going to be talking about how we use storytelling as a powerful communication tool and how scientists can use storytelling as a way to share their science more broadly. And my name's Janice McDonnell, and I'm part of COSEE now. Let's talk about why we tell stories. People are really hardwired to listen and be intently respondent to stories. And it really is a nice kind of impetus for us to think about how, as scientists, we can use storytelling to get our messages across. We think about the idea that individuals are more convincing than data. And think about when you go to purchase a car and you look at Consumer Reports and see volumes of data about Hondas and Toyotas and how reliable they are. But a simple story from your neighbor saying how their Honda has been so unreliable and they would never buy another one can impact your decision as much or more than looking at the Consumer Reports data. So in terms of scientists and stories, COSEE now is very intent on trying to get scientists to think about their science in terms of telling stories to a variety of audiences. So this quote kind of applies. So even if you have reams of evidence on your side, remember, numbers numb, jargon's jar, and nobody ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart. If you want to connect with your audience, tell them a story. And that's what we're trying to encourage scientists to try to think beyond just putting their science out there in terms of data and pie charts and numbers, but to relate that information in ways that people can digest and understand the relevance of their work. We're suggesting that that translates into telling stories about the environment and about the ocean in a more receivable way. So here's another example of why we should tell stories. Stories bring the invisible and abstract to life. I often think about scientific stories in terms of this particular story that happened when I was a young girl, where there was this garbage barge here off the coast of New Jersey that really made national news because of its inability to find a home port. And it sort of floated out there, nobody wanted it. And I think maybe listening to the story of this barge of garbage maybe made a lot of people, including myself as a young girl, think about the idea of recycling and where does the waste that we produce go. And this story really brought that to life on a national level, even though it was happening here just off the coast of New Jersey. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk to you a little bit about how to do that and how that might be easy for you to accomplish. We live in an age of too much information, TMI. There are lots and lots of media stories being pumped out, thousands of them a day, about how we're treating the planet, how we treat each other, and knowing your audience and understanding how to access that personal connection with people is really a skill that can be learned and achieved. Giving you some just general tips about what a successful story looks like. Successful stories are really small enough to be easily digested. They're simple enough to be told and retold. And they're sufficiently clear and compelling enough so that they succeed in illuminating a larger issue. So getting information out there in this fire hose of information that we find on the internet and among social networks and among the general and traditional media really does take some thought and skill. So as professional communicators, we want to find stories and use them to help our audiences appreciate the importance of our work. This often can require teams of individuals, the scientists working with educators, working with communication specialists, to really craft these stories to get the proper impact and attention that we all want them to have. Now I'd like to explain to you how to use storytelling techniques that you can take on as part of your lab or your group or your department to help you think about your science in terms of connecting with a larger public audience. Everybody remembers their English literature class from their undergraduate careers, and we've all learned how to write a story. And the same rules kind of apply. You start with what your audience understands, and then you move on to remembering that people connect with people. Including a memorable fact is often very helpful. It helps people remember the story and retell it. And then finally, think about your conclusion. First of all, your story having a conclusion, and then being able to point out in that conclusion, here's what we've learned, and here's how we're using that information to move forward and to continue to try to reach our goals. I'd like to suggest to you that you think about creating what we call a sacred bundle of stories to capture the important work that's going on in your lab. And this is really a Native American tradition where tribes would collect mementos and stories and actually create a physical bundle of these stories to be passed on from generation to generation as a way of passing down the history of their culture. And I'd like to suggest that we as scientists do the same. So let's talk about the types of stories you need in your bundle. The first one is the story of how we began. And in this one, you really focus on describing your organization or your program and how it was founded. You also think about the need for your work and specifically ways you have addressed that need. And pictured to the right here is one of my favorite stories of why my group and my work began. This is Patricia. She's a 6th grade science teacher at a local middle school here in New Jersey and never thought of herself as part of the environment. She often describes when she went to the beach with her family, she would sit on the beach curled up in a towel, not wanting to touch the sand, and would watch the rest of her family play. And I put her on a pontoon boat in a professional development program and asked her to make her way in the shallow water to a sandy beach to do some benthic invertebrate work that we were doing along the shoreline. And she looked at me in a state of panic and fear that she couldn't possibly stick her feet in this unknown water, but she did it. And she turned to me as she did and was able to say to me, "Take a picture so my family can see that I'm able now to enjoy the environment." She was so proud of herself. And this really reminds me of why I do what I do. So one of the other stories you need in your scientific sacred bundle is a story about the nature of our challenge. And this is really focused on developing stories that really explain the fundamental nature of the problem you're trying to tackle. And these kinds of stories remind us of the reason we dedicate our time, attention, and energy to what we do. And I'm reminded by my own scientific passions of really educating people about climate change. Climate change is one of the most important and largest problems that we've ever faced as a world. And the need to translate that challenge to the public in a way that's digestible is more important than ever. And one of the things that we've done as part of our COSEE project is develop audio slideshows that help scientists tell their stories about their experiences in Antarctica, the changes they're seeing from their point of view as people as much as scientists. And we're finding that these personal stories has really been effective in helping the public to understand the nature of climate change. So a third type of story to consider putting in your scientist sacred bundle is success stories. Everyone likes to talk about successful victories that they've had in their scientific careers, and those should be celebrated and shared. These stories really talk about the effectiveness that your science has had over time, the evolution of your career. My own personal success story would be in working with undergraduates here at Rutgers University. The joy that I get from teaching a course called Communicating Ocean Science, where I get to interact with undergraduates and share my knowledge and understanding of communicating science with these young would-be scientists so that they can integrate that into their thinking and into their careers. Another type of story to consider is the story of striving to improve, or really focusing on the lessons you've learned in your scientific career. And these are really stories that describe what you've learned in defeat. Misfires are always inevitable, and really we should embrace them for what they can teach us. And this is often much harder to talk about. No one likes to talk about their failures, but turning them into a lessons learned format can be very rewarding and very helpful to everyone. So this is a picture of a small group of community college professors that we worked with early on in our COSEE project. They're from all over the country, from Arizona, Nevada, inland places that don't have particularly great access to teaching about oceanography. Our thought was that by bringing them out and giving them field experiences and developing lots of great materials with them that they could use with their undergraduate students would help us promote ocean sciences in inland states. And it really was a misfire. We did not dedicate enough funding and enough bandwidth energy to help these professors really be successful. We really learned a lot about how to structure programs more efficiently and more realistically to get the kinds of impacts that we intended. Another type of story to consider is the story of individual exemplary performance stories. And these stories are really about individuals, and they should really convey the level of professionalism, creativity, and commitment that scientists bring to the table. This is Dr. Scott Glenn, who I feel has really taken to the extreme his ability to be good at not only his science, but his communication of science to a wide variety of audiences. Here he is pictured with some young people visiting our Ocean Day display at a local community event called Rutgers Day, where we get close to 50,000 people coming and touring campus and learning from our students. And Scott really puts every bit of energy and creativity in both his research and his education. And the last bit of storytelling we think you should do as part of your sacred bundle is the story of where we are going. Everybody wants to know what's the future hold for your science, and telling stories about the future dreams of your program is really important. For me, I'm really looking forward to the future of having scientists and educators work so closely together that we're able to create brilliant and effective educational tools that helps elevate ocean literacy in our country, where we have so many environmental problems that need the public's attention and commitment. And I would encourage you to think about your lab or your department as really creating this commonly told set of stories that help you articulate to all of the various people that you come in contact with. Again, funders, the public, your trustees, your board of advisors, that really help them get a clear understanding of who you are as a department and as a group or as a lab, and really help them to understand what you're all about and what you're trying to do. So I hope this has been helpful to you as a scientist to think about your work in terms of storytelling. I encourage you to think about using some of these techniques and creating your own sacred bundle of stories to help promote the good work that you do as a scientist. I also encourage you to reach out to the education and communication community to help you refine your stories and to tell them as best as you can so that we can all promote an ocean literate society. Thank you.